Have you ever wondered what would happen if Mark Grayson, not the teenager, not the hero still figuring himself out, but Emperor Mark, the man who ruled the Viltrum Empire for centuries, fought Thrag to the death and watched everyone he ever loved either die or fade away while he stayed exactly the same? Was suddenly reborn as a kid again? Same body, same house, same dad who's secretly planning to hand Earth over to an alien empire. But behind his eyes, 500 years of memories. Every fight, every loss, every person he couldn't save. So how strong does he get this time around? What does he change? And most importantly, can he actually save the people he spent 5 centuries wishing he could bring back? Let's get into it. So as Emperor Mark is reborn, the first thing he sees is his family, his mom, his dad, a normal house in a normal neighborhood. And with sadness in his eyes, he grows up again, knowing everything. He knows what his father actually is. He knows about the Viltrum Empire. He knows about Conquest, Thrag, the war, Robot, all of it, every single thing that's coming. But he's a child right now, and there's nothing he can do about most of it yet. So these early years play out mostly the same. What changes is how he uses the time. This version of Mark spends his entire childhood training, running longer distances than any kid his age should be able to handle, strength work that makes his coaches stare, pushing his body every single day toward a ceiling that hasn't opened yet. Because Emperor Mark knows something nobody around him does. When the Viltrumite genetics finally kick in, the physical foundation underneath determines how high the ceiling goes. He's building something that young Mark never had. He also tries to access his cursed energy early. Wait, wrong show. He tries to access his Viltrumite abilities early, but just like the original timeline, the biology doesn't care how much knowledge he has. The powers develop on their own schedule, so he trains, and he waits, and he watches his father at the dinner table every single morning, knowing exactly what Nolan is hiding. Here's where everything starts to change. In the original timeline, Nolan's secret came out in the worst possible way. A fight that nearly killed Mark. Years of Debbie not knowing why her husband left. Mark growing up without his father during some of the hardest years of his life. Emperor Mark is not letting that happen. So before any of that, before the cornfield, before the Guardians massacre, before any of it gets to that point, Mark sits his dad down privately one evening, and he tells Nolan he already knows. Nolan goes completely still. The mask drops instantly. He asks how Mark knows. Mark just looks at him and says he's had a long time to figure it out. What follows is the conversation they never got to have in the original timeline. No violence, no destroyed cornfield, no years of shame. Just a father and a son, one of whom has 500 years of evidence about who Nolan Grayson actually is underneath everything the Empire built around him. Mark tells him about the Coalition, about the war, about the Argyll bloodline that changes everything, about how Nolan eventually turns completely and becomes someone worth being. Nolan is quiet for a long time. Then he asks one question. What do you need me to do? Now here's where Mark has to make a really tough decision, because the Guardians of the Globe massacre is coming. Nolan kills them on orders from the Empire. And in the original timeline, that massacre is what brings Cecil into the picture. It's what creates the new Guardians, including Robot. It's the foundation everything else is built on. Stop it, and you don't just save 7 heroes. You pull out the entire foundation that Earth's defense gets rebuilt on top of. So after thinking about it carefully, Emperor Mark decides to let it happen. Not because he doesn't care, because he understands that sometimes the most painful version of events produces the strongest outcome. But he does one thing differently. He drops an anonymous tip that points Cecil's people toward the truth much faster than they would have found it naturally, getting Nolan to his moment of no return sooner, getting the whole process moving before the Empire notices something is wrong. When Alan the alien shows up on Earth looking for the planet's champion, he finds Mark instead of Nolan, same as the original timeline. But this version of Mark doesn't just send him away with a confused conversation. He knows exactly who Alan is, knows about the Coalition, knows about Thaddeus and the Scourge virus, and every conversation Alan eventually has with Nolan on the prison ship years from now. So instead of a brief fight and a misunderstanding, Mark has a real conversation with Alan. He tells him enough to get his attention. Coalition secrets, Viltrumite weaknesses, the bloodline information about Nolan's lineage that the Coalition spent years trying to piece together. Alan is completely thrown. He was expecting to fight a random hero and fill out a report. Instead, he's sitting across from a teenager briefing him on intelligence that should be impossible for him to have. "Who are you?" Alan asks. Mark just smiles. I'm the person who's going to end this war, but I need you to trust me first. Alan doesn't fully trust him. Not yet, but he doesn't leave either. That partnership, which in the original timeline didn't start properly for years, begins right here. Mark's powers arrive on the same schedule, senior year of high school, but this version of Mark treats getting his powers completely differently. He still becomes invincible, still makes the costume, still chooses the name, because changing those things would raise questions he doesn't want to answer yet. But the moment those Viltrumite genetics unlock on top of 5 years of preparation, the results are completely different from what anyone expected. The ceiling young Mark took years to reach, Emperor Mark hits it in months, and then keeps going. Cecil approaches Mark the same way he did in the original timeline, in the aftermath of the Guardians massacre, with a file and a proposition. But the Mark he finds is nothing like what he was expecting. Cecil is used to being the smartest person in the room, the man who knows more than everyone else, the man who runs the board. So when this teenager sits across from him and starts speaking, calmly, without hesitation, with zero nervousness, Cecil goes quiet very fast. Because Mark knows about the Reanimin program Cecil hasn't told anyone about, knows about D.A. Sinclair, knows about contingency plans Cecil filed 2 years ago that were never shared with anyone. Mark doesn't explain how he knows any of it. He just makes one thing clear. I'm not going to work for you, I'm going to work with you. There's a difference, and if you try to run me the way you ran my father, this conversation is over. Cecil is silent for a moment. Then he smiles. Fair enough. Here's the thing, even with Nolan on his side, the Empire is still watching. Thrag is still monitoring whether Earth is being prepared for conquest. So Mark and Nolan come up with a plan together. Nolan leaves Earth, but on their terms. Not as a man broken by what he did, not fleeing in shame. He leaves deliberately, going back into Viltrumite space to act as an intelligence source, getting close to Thrag, feeding information back to Mark while building the case for the coalition. Debbie still doesn't fully understand. That part still hurts, but Nolan doesn't leave as a monster this time. He leaves as a man his son trusted with a mission, and he promises to come back. After Nolan's departure, the next Viltrumite to show up on Earth is Anissa, coming to check on Mark's progress, to see if Nolan's half-human son is actually doing what the Empire needs him to do. She threatens Mark's mom to get his attention, same as the original timeline, but this version of Mark already knew she was coming. He takes the conversation somewhere private, and instead of the same circular argument about conquest and duty that went absolutely nowhere the first time, he immediately tells her the Argyll bloodline secret. Nolan is the son of Argyll, which makes me Argyll's grandson. The throne Thrag has been holding belongs to my family. Anissa stares at him. How do you know that? Because I have access to information you don't. And if you actually want what's best for the Empire, you need to hear me out. Anissa doesn't trust him. She's thousands of years old, and she hasn't survived that long by taking teenagers at their word. But she's also smart enough to know that if the bloodline claim is real, everything changes. She doesn't attack, doesn't make promises, but she listens. Now there's something else Mark needs to address about Anissa. Something he's been dreading since the moment he woke up with these memories. In the original timeline, after the Viltrumite War, when the Viltrumites relocated to Earth's moon, Anissa did something unforgivable to Mark. Something he carried for the rest of his life. Emperor Mark is not letting that happen. He can't tell her directly without revealing too much about what he knows. But he can make sure the circumstances that led to that moment never line up the same way. Making sure she's further along the road toward understanding humanity before those events could ever occur. He plants seeds early, quietly, not through confrontation, but through every small interaction that gradually shifts how she sees the people around her. It's the most careful thing he does in this entire timeline. Angstrom levies attack, 20 evil alternate versions of Mark leveling cities across the planet, happens essentially the same way. Mark can't prevent it. He doesn't know exactly when Angstrom is coming or where the portals open. All he can do is respond. But he responds like someone who has been fighting at this level for 5 centuries. The evil variants are strong. But they're fighting someone who has already defeated every version of himself that exists. The battle is still brutal, cities are still damaged, people still die, but the scale is smaller. And this time Mark comes out of it without the psychological damage that young Mark carried. The guilt, the fear of being seen as a threat, the exhaustion that made him vulnerable to what came immediately after. which matters enormously, because what comes immediately after is Conquest. Conquest arrives right after the Invincible War cleanup, exactly on schedule. He was briefed on the way. Young half-breed, conflicted, should be easy. He lands, looks across at Mark standing there waiting for him, starts his speech, the one about duty and the Empire and what happens to Viltrumites who forget what they are. Gets 3 sentences in. "I know what you're going to say next," Mark says. "I've heard it before." Conquest stops. In 5,000 years, nobody has ever said that to him. He charges anyway, because that's what Conquest does. Now here's the thing. Knowing how someone fights doesn't make them easy to beat. Conquest is 5,000 years old. He has survived the Scourge virus, had his arm ripped off by Rognars, and kept going. His body is a weapon that has been refined over millennia. Mark can't end this in seconds, but he can end it differently. In the original timeline, Mark had no idea what was coming. Every hit landed as a surprise. Every move Conquest made caught him off guard. He was reactive the entire fight, just trying to survive long enough to find an opening. This Mark is never reactive. The moment Conquest throws his first punch, Mark is already somewhere else. He knows the overhead swing is coming before Conquest commits to it. He knows the follow-through leaves the injured side exposed for exactly half a second. He knows that Conquest's arrogance makes him slow to adjust when his first attack misses completely. So instead of eating damage and fighting back, Mark just doesn't get hit. He moves, waits, makes Conquest chase him, makes Conquest frustrated, makes the 5,000-year-old warrior who has never had to work for a victory start making mistakes he hasn't made in centuries. The fight still goes several minutes. Conquest is still Conquest. But Mark comes out of it with barely a scratch. And Eve, who in the original timeline nearly died in this fight, whose near-death unlocked her full power, Eve never had to fight at all. She's standing at the edge of the scene, watching Mark with an expression he can't quite read. Cecil shows up afterward completely confused. He was monitoring everything, prepared for disaster, prepared for Mark to barely survive like every projection suggested. Instead, Mark is standing there without a scratch on him while Conquest is down. "How?" Cecil asks. "I knew everything he was going to do before he did it," Mark says. Cecil stares at him for a long moment. "We need to talk about how that's possible." "Yes," Mark says. "We do, but here's what Mark sits with after Conquest is down. In the original timeline, Eve's near-death in that fight was the moment she discovered her full power. The moment she technically died and her body rebuilt itself from nothing. The moment she realized her abilities could work on living organic matter, including herself. That was also the moment she eventually discovered she was immortal. The Eve who grows old and comes back younger. The Eve who gets to stay beside Mark for centuries. That version of Eve might not exist in this timeline, because Mark protected her. He can't know for certain. Maybe she discovers it another way. Maybe a different moment triggers the same realization eventually. But maybe it doesn't. And Emperor Mark has to carry not knowing whether protecting her in this moment was the kindest thing he ever did, or the thing that cost her the most. With Conquest handled and Cecil now fully in the picture, everything starts accelerating. Nolan has been in Viltrumite space feeding information back to Mark since he left. Building relationships, staying close to the Empire's inner circle, waiting for the right moment. That moment is now. Mark and Nolan reveal the Argol bloodline connection together, publicly, with enough evidence behind it that Thrag can't just crush the claim by force without the entire older generation of Viltrumites turning against him. The effect is exactly what Emperor Mark remembered from centuries ago. The Empire splits almost immediately. Viltrumites who grew up under Argol's rule and quietly resented Thrag for years, they move to Nolan's side almost overnight. Thrag feels the ground shifting under him, and Thrag, when the ground shifts, doesn't wait to see what happens next. He moves. Before the war begins, there's one more problem Mark has been quietly working on for years: Robot. In the original timeline, Robot's takeover of Earth isn't random. It's built on years of accumulated evidence. Every catastrophe Mark fails to prevent. Every time institutions fail. Every crisis that convinces someone as intelligent as Robot that the only solution is control with enough force to make it permanent. Emperor Mark has been dismantling that evidence base, piece by piece, since the beginning. The Dinosaurus situation never reaches the point where Robot uses it to justify his ideology. Every global crisis that would have been part of Robot's argument gets resolved faster, quieter, with less destruction. And when Mark finally sits down with Robot directly, he says the thing nobody ever said to him in the original timeline. "I know what you're planning. I know why you think it's the right call, and I'm telling you from experience, the version of you that follows through on this becomes something you won't recognize." Robot is silent for a long moment. "How could you possibly know what I'm planning?" "Because I've watched brilliant people make this exact calculation before. It always starts with saving everyone. It never ends the way they intended." Whether Robot fully changes course, that's genuinely uncertain. He's too intelligent to be redirected by a single conversation. But a seed gets planted that was never planted in the original timeline. And sometimes that's enough to change the angle of what grows. The war still comes. Emperor Mark never expected to avoid it entirely. Some things only end one way. But the version of the Viltrumite War in this timeline is different in ways that matter. The Coalition goes in with intelligence that took 5 centuries of hard experience to accumulate. The Viltrumites are more fractured internally. Thrag is operating with less support than he expected and more desperation than he's comfortable with. The final battle with Thrag is still brutal. Thrag is still the most powerful Viltrumite who ever lived. He doesn't go down easy and he doesn't go down clean. But this time when Thrag tries to isolate Nolan, the way he did in the original timeline, targeting the father to break the son, Mark is already there. Father and son fight together. It's not clean, it's not quick, but it ends. Thrag goes down, and Nolan Grayson is alive. Cecil is alive. The Guardians are built on a stronger foundation. The Viltrumites relocate to Earth's moon and begin assimilating into human society the same way. But with Anissa already further along the road toward choosing humanity, the version of that story that plays out is different enough that the worst of it never happens. Robot never builds the argument he used to justify taking over the planet because the evidence he needed was never allowed to accumulate. Mark can't save everyone from everything. 500 years of experience taught him that clearly. But he changed the angle of enough dominoes that the world coming out the other side looks fundamentally different from the one he came from. Years later, after everything, Mark is standing on the roof of his old house. Eve comes to stand beside him. She doesn't know everything he carries, everything he remembers, every version of their life together that exists somewhere in 5 centuries of memory. She asks what he's thinking about. He looks at her for a moment. "My dad asked me something once. Took me a long time to understand what he was actually asking." She waits. He looks back at the sky. "He wanted to know what I'd have after 500 years. "What did you tell him?" Mark is quiet. "This," he says. "I told him I'd have this." So that's what happens when Emperor Mark is reborn with all his memories. He stops the cornfield fight before it happens. He keeps Nolan on Earth. He connects with Alan years earlier than the original timeline. He ends the Conquest fight in under a minute. He splits the Viltrum Empire using the Bloodline secret before the war costs what it cost the first time. He keeps Cecil alive. He dismantles the evidence that Robot used to justify taking over Earth. He changes almost everything. But here's the one thing that stays with him. Eve might never discover she's immortal, because the moment that was supposed to unlock, that was the moment he protected her from. He saved her from the worst night of her life. And he still doesn't know if that was the right call. Now I want to hear from you. Does Emperor Mark tell Eve everything, every memory, every version of their life together across 5 centuries? Or does he let her fall in love with him again without knowing? Drop it in the comments. I've been going back and forth on this one for days and I genuinely cannot decide. And if you want to see what happens when another Invincible character gets sent back with everything they know, that video is coming next. You already know what to do.